Hey guys, tonight we drift through shadowed corridors, past oil lamp glows and the scent of cardamom in the air, into the curious world of sleep under the Ottoman Empire. You're wrapped in a rough cotton quilt, somewhere in a house tucked off a cobbled Istanbul alley. Outside, you hear the faint creak of a wheelbarrow, the clink of wooden sandals on stone, and a rooster, crowed before it's even remotely helpful. Welcome to a time when sleep wasn't just biological, it was imperial policy, spiritual practice, and community sport all at once. The Ottomans didn't see sleep the way we do. 8 hours straight in a pitch-dark room? That would have seemed decadent, bizarre, or just a little suspicious. You're about to discover that your sleep, your messy, irregular roll over at 3 a.m. insomnia, isn't so modern after all. In fact, it might have been just right for the world's most sprawling early modern empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Bonus points if you're in bed already. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie there, imagining yourself as a baker's apprentice in the 1600s. You've just laid out the last loaf, wiped your flour-dusted hands, and now you're curling up behind the oven for your first of possibly 3 micro-sleeps. That's the thing about Ottoman time. It flows like thick molasses, dripping slowly, but somehow bending around religious rituals, imperial needs, and the moon. You wouldn't exactly have a clock, at least not the kind you'd recognize. Instead, time ticks to the rhythm of public calls to prayer, the turn of stars, and the oil level in a dish lamp that someone forgot to refill again. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans genuinely preferred night to day, or if that was just a byproduct of too many spicy stews and soft cushions. Either way, the night was alive. Your neighbors are still awake. In fact, your aunt across the street is probably just finishing her embroidery, by lamplight, mind you, while humming some untraceable lullaby. Down in the courtyard, someone's loudly discussing figs. Because, of course, it's midnight, and your city is only just beginning to sigh. Most people back then didn't even try to sleep through the whole night. You get a few hours after sundown, wake up for prayers, maybe sip something warm, chat with neighbor, and then slide back into bed again before sunrise. It wasn't seen as weird. It was seen as responsible, pious, and just plain normal. Elite families often pushed their bedtime even later, especially in the cooler months when evenings were more pleasant. The smell of roasting chestnuts, the plunk of a saz string, and the flicker of candlelight meant business was still happening. Marriages were proposed. Books were copied. Philosophies were debated over syrupy sherbet and honey-soaked walnuts. Basically, peak brain power kicked in somewhere around 11:30 p.m., which is probably when you're listening to this. So hey, maybe you were born in the wrong era, but you're not a pasha or a poet. You're our fictional you, a regular Ottoman resident, just try and get some decent shut-eye between the late shift and the rooster's personal vendetta. There were, surprisingly, official sleep-adjacent regulations. The states sometimes issued laws about when bakers could start work, how long guards had to stay awake at the gate, and when the city's drum patrol could be allowed to start their rounds. Yes, they had drum patrols, not for music, for security and timekeeping. If you're trying to nap during the first watch and someone bangs a drum outside your window, congratulations, you're now part of Ottoman insomnia history. One mainstream fact you'll hear tossed around. The Ottomans were masters of bureaucracy and urban control, but under all that order was a surprisingly flexible approach to time. You weren't punished for sleeping mid-morning if you've been awake all night, kneading dough, or attending a cousin's wedding that somehow lasted 14 hours. The empire functioned on rhythms, not rigidity. And while this sounds whimsical, midnight fig chats and segmented naps, don't romanticize it too fast. Homes were cramped. Mosquitoes were enthusiastic. And segmented sleep often wasn't so much a life choice as it was your neighbor yelling across the courtyard again because she forgot to soak the lentils. There were no earplugs. You were the earplug. Historians still argue whether this sleep pattern, early rest, wakeful interlude, then a second sleep, was unique to the Ottoman world, or if it mirrored what many pre-industrial cultures did. There's some evidence that rural France and even medieval England saw similar patterns. But few civilizations elevated to an art form the way the Ottomans did, complete with scented baths, sweetened herbal teas, and small pillow pyramids designed to maximize airflow on a hot night. Now, while most of the empire slumbered in waves, there were those who barely slept at all. Sufi mystics, traveling tradesmen, and of course, those guys who own coffee houses. We'll get to their jittery nocturnal antics soon enough. But for now, roll over. Imagine the feel of a thin cotton sheet against your skin. The soft clink of ceramic down in the kitchen. A candle guttering out. The quiet thrill of knowing the rest of your sleep is still waiting for you. Just one more prayer, one more sigh, one more dream away. You stretch, not fully awake, but not fully asleep either. That in-between foggy space where dreams brush your cheek like moth wings and the sound of distant sandals on stones somehow matters more than it should. This is the Ottoman second sleep zone. Welcome back. You missed. Well, not much. Maybe the moon shifting a few degrees. Maybe a cat toppling over someone's vinegar jar. And now, as you pull your blanket higher over your shoulder, we roll into a topic as oddly charming as it is critical to Ottoman sleep culture. The watchmen and their eternal, not actually that quiet night shifts. These guys were called Beksi, and they were the backbone of nocturnal urban safety. Not police exactly, not firemen per se, but little of both, plus timekeepers, gossip spreaders, and occasional scolders of teenagers trying to sneak home late from a tea house concert. You didn't set your alarm clock. You waited for a Beksi to call the hour or pass by wrapping a stick on the ground to remind you it was prayer time or that your chimney was dangerously smoky again. And that's not even counting the Ramadan drummers. Yes, the pre-dawn percussion enthusiasts. Imagine you're just dozing back off after your midnight interlude, and boom, there's Mustafa, the rhythmically ambitious waking the entire block. So no one misses Sahur, the pre-fast meal. He's not being mean. It's tradition. Also, he's wearing one of those floppy felt hats and looks very serious about it. Now let's talk about fire, because back then, fire had beef with your sleep schedule. Ottoman cities were basically constructed from dry wood, dry people, dry everything. Night fires weren't just possible, they were inevitable, which is why many city guards were tasked specifically with staying awake and scanning rooftops for plumes of smoke. This, by the way, is how coffee crept into the Ottoman nighttime routine. The guards and watchmen needed to stay alert. Clerks copying manuscripts by candlelight needed their focus. Poets attending midnight salons refused to nap while the conversation was just heating up. And so, boom, coffee enters the bloodstream of empire. Now you might be curled up peacefully now, but if you were a 17th century artisan, you might be up brewing a thick, sludgy cup of Turkish coffee, complete with a brass pot and those tiny porcelain cups that burn your fingers if you're not careful. Scholars still argue whether the coffee boom started in religious circles or spread from trade routes first, but either way, by the late 1500s, the stuff was basically fuel for the entire empire's inability to sleep in one sitting. And here's where things get weirdly bureaucratic, because of course, this is still an empire. You might think people sip their coffee in quiet contemplation. Not quite. The government, as Ottoman as it gets, licensed coffee houses monitored them and sometimes shut them down because of the disruptive social atmosphere, which is historians speak for too many loud poems, chess tournaments, and suspiciously philosophical debates about the moon. Inside a late-night coffee house, you find students, musicians, ex-soldiers, and unemployed poets half asleep, half caffeinated, debating astronomy while someone roasted chickpeas behind a screen. And in the corner, that one guy who always tried to predict people's futures from the coffee grounds left in their cup. You're not sure how he always knew you'd have a journey soon, but he did. The irony, of course, is that the Ottomans were super into regulating things, but very chill about sleep itself. As long as you didn't set the city on fire or forget to close the bathhouse doors at night, a surprisingly common offense, you could nap whenever. The culture thrived in twilight. From elaborate night markets to late-night calligraphy sessions, people knew how to use the dark hours productively. There's even a delightful fringe theory floating around about sleep feasts. Some believe that in certain Sufi lodges, sleep itself was ritualized. Guests were encouraged to nap, reflect, Wake to soft flute music, sip rose water, and nap again. It's half dream, half whispered rumor. But let's just pretend it's true, because that sounds like the spa day your overworked brain deserves. And while we're on the subject of Sufis, these mystical travelers really redefine nocturnal life. Many of them believe that nighttime was the best time for spiritual connection, especially the hours before dawn. While the city slumbered, they performed daikr, ritual chants, rocking gently, eyes half-lidded, whispering divine names into a night. So still it might just answer back. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was preparation for dawn's prayers, for work, for whatever came next. The dark hours weren't lost time. They were sacred time, introspective, gentle, soaked in candlelight and cardamom steam. And even if your mattress was basically a thick rug with some straw under it, you could find comfort in knowing that you weren't wasting the night. You were living it. Historians still argue whether this Ottoman sleep model was uniquely sustainable or just a clever adaptation to urban density and fire hazards. Either way, it's hard not to envy the intentionality of it. You didn't just collapse into sleep. You ease into it, dipped in and out, like sliding in and out of a tepid bath. So now, as your imagined Ottoman counterpart shifts under their blanket, listening to a watchman tap, tap, tap past the alley, you too can settle a little deeper into the night. You've got time. A second sleep is coming. And after that, maybe you'll wake up to the soft clatter of spoons against copper, the smell of lentils simmering in a clay pot, and the satisfaction of knowing you lived through a night that was never meant to be silent. You stretch again, deeper this time, as if your bones remember how to be Ottoman. Outside, the faint glow of pre-dawn doesn't matter yet. You're still firmly in the warm, velvety belly of the night, and now we're gliding into the sacred and slightly chaotic territory of Ottoman bedroom arrangements. Or, more accurately, the curious question of where everyone actually slept. Spoiler alert, there weren't many bedrooms in the modern sense. You wouldn't stroll down a carpeted hallway, open a creaky door, and find a room with a queen-size mattress, matching nightstands, and a Himalayan salt lamp. No, you'd find the sleeping equivalent of organized chaos, where multipurpose rooms transformed into sleeping spaces the moment someone yawned. You probably already guessed. It was all about the Siddur, that long, cushioned bench running along the wall in many Ottoman homes. Daytime, it was for tea, embroidery, storytelling, or occasionally watching your neighbor's goat try to sneak into your courtyard again. Nighttime, toss some quilts and maybe a pillow or two, and boom, it's your bed now. Don't roll over too enthusiastically, or you might fall off and startle the cat. Beds were fluid. Walls into fine sleep space. Routine did. When sleep crept in, people simply unrolled a mat, maybe stretched their arms with a sigh, and surrendered to quiet. No dramatic bedtime rituals, no 15-step skincare routine, no ambient rain playlist on loop. Unless you count actual rain, which dripped through the roof tiles every so often with nature's own ASMR. And don't even get me started on the communal sleeping arrangements. In many households, especially among the less wealthy, everyone just slept in the same room. Parents, kids, maybe grandma. If someone snored, you just lived with it. If the baby cried, everyone woke up. If your cousin had nightmares about getting chased by a giant eggplant, true story from a 17th century folktale, well, you rolled over and hoped it didn't require a full family meeting. What's delightfully odd is how little hierarchy there was in Ottoman sleeping order. In many cultures, the master of the house gets the grandest sleeping chamber. Here, he might be sharing a cushion with two kids, one half-unrolled prayer rug, and a cat named Yusuf who refuses to sleep anywhere but someone's stomach. It wasn't about claiming turf. It was about coexisting in warmth. And warmth, by the way, was no small matter. These weren't centrally heated marble palaces for most folks. Winters in Anatolia and the Balkans could get genuinely icy. So people layered, socks, wool, whatever felt were handy, and piled in close. Think of it as a cross between a slumber party and a survival technique. But don't get too cozy just yet. You see, Ottoman houses had another twist. The odalik, a kind of women's quarters in some households, especially among the elite. Here, Female family members and attendants often slept, talked, and managed their side of domestic life. These spaces could be luxurious or sparse, quiet or full of midnight whispers and the clink of bangles as someone shifted in her sleep. Historians still argue whether these separate quarters empowered women by giving them control over domestic space or isolated them under stricter supervision. Either way, it shaped who slept where and when. Men had their circles. Women had theirs. Children floated between them, usually landing wherever the food smelled better. Unless you think Ottoman sleep was all domestic fluff, let's peek inside the palaces. Topkapi, in particular, a maze of tiled corridors and plush rooms. The Sultan's home wasn't immune to weird bedtime logistics either. Harem women, concubines, servants, and eunuchs all had their assigned sleeping zones. Beds were richer, sure, but still temporary. Rolled up each morning, space reclaimed for daytime routines. One fringe rumor insists that some palace eunuchs slept upright, in chairs, to avoid ever being fully vulnerable. It's hard to confirm, but it's the kind of detail you'd expect in a world where every square inch of sleep carried political and personal meaning. Even the Sultan himself, believed to be the shadow of God on earth, didn't have a bedroom in the Western sense. His sleeping quarters were ornate, yes, but functionally temporary. Nothing in Ottoman sleep culture was static. You drifted into the night the same way you slipped out of bath, relaxed, but never unaware. Which brings us, oddly enough, to the traveling sleepers. Nomads, caravan traders, seasonal workers. For them, sleep was wherever you could tie up your donkey and unroll a mat, under the stars and market stalls, beside rivers that hummed you to sleep. They weren't bound to seders or slippers. The empire sprawled, and so did their rest. And let's not forget the hammam sleepers. It sounds odd now, but in some seasons, particularly winter, wealthy citizens or important travelers would request to sleep in bathhouses. The heat of the marble floors, the steam hanging in the air like lazy fog. It was practically a luxury hotel for the night. Plus, if you forgot your towel, well, there were extras. The funny part? Even with all this variation, Ottoman people didn't obsess about sleep the way we do. No sleep trackers, no REM cycle charts, no TikTok videos explaining how to lucid dream by staring at a blinking dot for 7 minutes. They just rested when it was time, or when the Bexy passed by, humming under his breath, reminding them the night still had hours to offer. So now, as you drift further into your own cozy corner, whatever that looks like, just imagine yourself back there, wrapped in a wool blanket beside your siblings, a clay lamp guttering low, a faint draft slipping through the wooden shutters. The air smells like rose water and ash. Someone snores. Someone sighs. And you sleep. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays in protest at nothing in particular. You shift a little in your imagined wool blanket, the sounds of the Ottoman night curling softly around you. But now, let's lean into a more subtle rhythm. The soft tick of time, the unseen pulses of the hours. Because if there's one thing that shaped Ottoman sleep even more than embroidered cushions or midnight figs, it was the structure of time itself. Specifically, the ease-in and the clockless clock. You don't own a wristwatch. No smartphone buzzing with bedtime reminders. Instead, you got the call to prayer. That spine-tingling, musical echo rolling from the minarets 5 times a day, and crucially, 5 times a night and day. It's more than a spiritual marker. It's your calendar, your stopwatch, your alarm clock. And if you're very sleepy, your excuse for rolling over and whispering, just 5 more minutes. In the Ottoman Empire, time didn't run on fixed mechanical hours. Not at first. Instead, it bent gently around the sun. The day began at sunrise. Always. So that meant noon didn't come at exactly 12 p.m. It came 6 hours after the sun peaked over the horizon. That's if you were counting. Which most people weren't, because timekeeping was handled by someone else, the muvakkit or mosque timekeeper. Now, this was a job. Picture someone hunched over an astrolabe, squinting at the angle of a shadow, calculating the shifting hours day by day. This guy kept time like a medieval DJ remixes tracks, constant tweaking, blending, adjusting for vibes and daylight. The hours stretched and shrank like they were made of warm taffy. And because of that, nighttime sleep was more fluid than ours. The sun moves, so does bedtime. The ease and sounds, maybe it's time to wake, or pray, or nap in a suspiciously comfortable stairwell. Historians still argue whether this flexible approach to timekeeping promoted healthier sleep cycles or just left people permanently confused and a little behind on chores. What's clear is that nobody set a strict alarm. You woke when the muezzin sang out, or when your neighbor started making breakfast too loudly, or when your goat, again, got into neighbor's garden. Now let's zoom in on one very niche tool, the Ottoman candle clock. These weren't for common folk, but the wealthy, the scholarly, or the devout occasionally used candles marked with divisions. As the wax melted, the hour passed. You could even embed small pins at intervals, which would drop into a metal tray and ping like a tiny, fiery alarm clock. High-tech, right? Until you realize one breeze and the whole time system melts. Literally. There's also a fringe belief that some dervish lodges, yes, the whirling meditative mystics, marked nighttime with incense clocks. You burn a line of scented powder across a tile, letting it smolder slowly. When the scent changed, it was time for the next ritual. Time didn't tick. It wafted. And then there's our good friend the Zamani Sotler, temporal hours. Ottoman night was split into 12 equal parts, no matter how long or short the night actually was. So, in winter, each of those 12 hours was longer. In summer, shorter. The length changed daily. A bit like how your workday somehow gets longer the moment you smell vacation coming. It made scheduling tricky. You couldn't just say, let's meet at 8. You had to say something like, let's meet 2 hours after sunset, unless the sky is cloudy. In which case, let's just wing it. Planners today would weep. But the Ottomans, they rolled with it. They understood that time was more of a suggestion than a mandate, like that friend who's on their way but still hasn't left the house. This flexible approach influenced everything, especially how people moved through the night. Sleep wasn't one big, uninterrupted snooze fest. People often slept in chunks, known now as segmented or biphasic sleep. You'd drift off not long after the evening Isha prayer. Maybe wake up around midnight for a little reading, tea, or quiet reflection, and then drift back down after the Hajjud, that optional but much admired late-night prayer. In that wakeful middle time, the empire hummed gently. Bakers started their work. Scholars read by oil lamps. Lovers wrote sappy poems. An occasional thief, let's be honest, skulked through dark alleyways hoping nobody was up. Even ordinary households might stir briefly. A grandmother might rise to check the fire hadn't gone out. A child might need soothing after a dream about dancing frogs. And someone, always someone, was probably sneaking a date from a storage jar. The beauty of it was this shared pause, a kind of communal insomnia with spiritual flair. No shame in it. In fact, many Ottomans believed that those silent hours were blessed, ideal for prayer, poetry, or just staring at the moon and wondering what that owl outside your window was plotting. Modern scientists have actually studied this and found that humans may be naturally inclined toward this sleep pattern. Our ancestors all over the world followed it. But somewhere along the line, probably when industrialization came charging in with its factory bells and railway timetables, we shifted to one long, consolidated sleep. Efficient, sure, but is it cozier? Now, don't drift too far just yet. We've still got a few time quirks up our sleeve, like the fact that timekeeping wasn't just about tracking hours. It was about honoring rhythms. Religious, agricultural, social. Everything swayed to these living currents. Even the elite, with their imported clocks from Venice or Vienna, still watched the light first, not the minute hand. And remember our palace eunuchs? Some of them carried water clocks at night, their slow drip-drip a rhythm for duty rounds. Not every job in the palace was glamorous. Sometimes it was watching sand fall or wax drip, ensuring that the next task came not a minute too early nor too late. So here you are, tucked under your imaginary Ottoman quilt, eyes just heavy enough. The easing has sounded. The incense trail is burned halfway across the tile, and your neighbor's rooster has not yet betrayed you with his enthusiastic scheduling. You're allowed to stay right here between hours in the soft breath of a world that let time stretch and yawn just like you. Your eyelids flutter a little, just a little, as we move from the flexible tides of Ottoman time into the deliciously shadowy quiet of the night. Not the metaphorical night, the literal one. It's dark now. The lamps are out. The prayer calls have softened into memory, and you're floating into the world of Ottoman midnight habits. It's not all sleep and silence, you know. Sometimes people got very busy after hours. Let's peek inside an Ottoman home. Picture a courtyard house. Its garden perfumed with mint and basil. Fig leaves still slick from dew. The family within has just finished the evening meal. Likely lentils or bulgur, with maybe a suspiciously good stew if it's payday. Bellies full, they prayed, maybe recited some Quran verses, and stretched out on cushions stuffed with wool or straw. The babies are already out like snuff candles. The adults? They'll be joining them soon, but not for long, because as midnight creeps in, there's a slow stirring. A candle flickers in the corner. Someone gets up, not sleepwalking, just multitasking. Midnight wasn't always a time to stay asleep. Often, it was a time to return to life. This brings us into the curious practice of biphasic sleep. Basically, you sleep in two parts, first sleep and second sleep. It wasn't unique to the Ottomans. Much of the pre-industrial world did it. But the Ottomans made it a bit of an art form. First sleep starts not long after the last prayer, around 9 or 10 p.m., and goes for 4 hours or so. Then comes a wakeful gap. An hour? Maybe 2? Just enough to stretch, think, pray, or eat the cookie you promised yourself earlier. Historians still argue whether this interlude was used more for spirituality or for scandalous sneaking around. Probably both. Some people read poetry or religious texts. Others use it to catch up on gossip in hushed tones while sipping something warm. You could visit a friend, light an oil lamp, and have a whole conversation, provided you didn't wake the baby, or the in-laws, or both. In some wealthier households, this was the moment for baths. Public hammams, believe it or not, often at late-night hours, especially for women who couldn't go during the male-dominated day slots. A midnight soak with steam and orange blossom soap? Honestly, not a bad use of a sleepy hour. Even the streets weren't entirely dead. In bigger cities like Istanbul, you might find patrolling watchmen, called beksies, walking with long staffs, knocking rhythmically on the stones. Not just to scare away thieves, but to tell everyone, hey, I'm awake. You can be, too. Some spice vendors and bakers started their work around now. The idea was to have fresh bread ready for the dawn customers. So, if you happen to be up and happen to know the right back alley and happen to have a coin or two, you might sneak out for piping hot simmet, a sesame ring that tastes like a bagel, if a bagel had dreams of being more delicious. There's even a charming, slightly odd theory that some folks kept little boxes of dried fruit or candy under the pillow for that midnight hunger. Not confirmed, of course, but just imagine it. You wake up, it's dark, the wind brushes the curtains, and you reach beneath your head for a sweet plum. Peak midnight snack strategy. And you weren't alone in this habit. Letters and journals from the time occasionally mention this middle-of-the-night liminal space. It wasn't strange. It was expected. It gave you time to reflect, to feel the hush of the city, to exist not as a worker or merchant or parent, but as a quiet body under stars. This kind of sleep, interrupted but intentional, might sound counterproductive, but some modern scientists believe it's more natural than our modern 8-hour sprint. There's something comforting about it. Instead of dreading insomnia, people welcomed it. You woke up? Cool. Time for a snack. Or a prayer. Or maybe just staring at the wall and making up stories about the cracks. Fringe tidbit alert. In some rural regions, villagers told tales of night spirits that passed between homes during this mid-sleep period. Not evil ones, necessarily, just mischievous. Maybe one would hide your sock or whisper dreams into your ear. Parents told children to whisper blessings before nodding off again, just in case they caught a whisper of something spooky between dreams. Now, not everyone had the luxury of this dreamy dual sleep system. Laborers working sunrise shifts didn't always get a second snooze. But even they found ways to pause. A nap leaning on a donkey cart. A blink stolen behind sacks of flour. You take what sleep you can get in a world lit by lanterns and dictated by chickens. Meanwhile, in the palaces, things could get lively. Late-night strategy meetings were common, especially if something urgent had happened. Ottoman sultans often held private consultations or received secret reports during these hours. When the palace was quiet and ears less likely to overhear. Imagine being a guy tiptoeing through velvet-draped halls, trying not to sneeze while carrying a scroll about a regional rebellion. Stressful. Then there were the insomniacs. Because let's be honest, no matter how flexible your bedtime, someone's still going to lie awake counting shadow lines on the ceiling. In Ottoman times, there were nighttime tonics for that. Infusions of lemon balm, rose petals, and poppy seeds. A warm glass of milk with honey and black cumin. Some say even lullabies weren't just for kids. Adults might hum to themselves or recite verses until the brain finally gave up. One enduring debate among scholars, whether the rise of European-style clocks in the 18th century began the death of segmented sleep in the empire. Mechanical time slowly elbowed out the organic flow of the night. Bells replaced muezzins. Uniform schedules crept into schools, post offices, and train stations. Sleep became less about rhythms and more about alarms. Still, for centuries, this gentle, broken midnight world flourished. And as your imaginary Ottoman self stretches, ready to drift into second sleep, there's something undeniably peaceful about it. No urgency. No buzzing phone. Just moonlight, warm tea, and maybe a rogue fig thief climbing a courtyard wall. Now that your first sleep is out of the way and your midnight snack of honeyed apricots is settling comfortably in your imaginary Ottoman belly, you begin to drift, ever so gently, into the tender hush of second sleep. But not so fast. Before the dawn stretches her golden fingers across the Bosphorus, you're not entirely alone in your twilight drifting. Because somewhere nearby, probably in a slightly colder room with thicker walls, the Janissaries are also stirring. Yes, the Janissaries. The elite Ottoman infantry, corps you've definitely heard of, possibly confused with boy band at some point, are an unavoidable part of this story. And believe it or not, their strange daily rhythms and sleeping habits tell us just as much about the Ottoman world as any sultan's silk pajamas. You wake up as one of them. Well, hypothetically, and you're already aware your sleep's been part duty, part habit, part exhaustion. Janissaries didn't just protect the sultan. They were administrators, firefighters, city enforcers, and, depending on the era, something like a walking, grumbling bureaucracy with helmets. So what does a Janissary's night look like? First off, they didn't get the cozy courtyards. They lived in communal barracks, rooms lined with thick rugs and bunk-style bedding, somewhere between monastic discipline and sleepover chaos. There was always a candle burning, always a guy sharpening something, and always someone whispering gossip about a recent tavern scuffle that may or may not have involved a goat. Mainstream historical fact. Janissaries were originally composed of enslaved Christian boys taken to the Devshirme system, selected for their strength, smarts, and sheer potential for drama. These boys were converted to Islam, raised in intense training schools, and turned into one of the most feared military forces of their time. No pressure, right? But here's the fringe detail. Some reports, especially from suspicious European visitors, claim that Janissaries were so disciplined that they never married and never touched alcohol. Now, historians still argue whether this was more propaganda than practice. Plenty of Janissaries, especially in later centuries, married quite enthusiastically and drank even more so. Especially Raki, that cloudy anise-flavored troublemaker of a drink. You might not sip it before battle, but after? Let's just say it wasn't all prayer beads and sit-ups. Anyway, in the wee hours, Janissaries operated in shifts. Especially in Istanbul, the larger barracks kept night patrols rotating through the streets. You might be the one waking up for 3 a.m. shift. Boots on, sword belt loosely slung over your shoulder, grumbling as you pass through the chilly corridor toward the city gates. You don't even get coffee. Just a chunk of bread and the eternal reminder that Ottoman bakers never, ever skimped on the crust. Walking the lanes of Istanbul at this hour was both eerie and oddly peaceful. You'd hear whisper from late-night cafes or the soft rattle of dice from a side alley. The city never slept entirely. Someone was always up sewing, sweeping, praying, or just peeking to the shutters in hopes of catching a scandal. And yes, the janissaries were the ones who were supposed to keep order. Sometimes they did. Other times, well, not so much. Especially in the 17th and 18th centuries, they got a little too comfortable in their roles. Like when they decided that they could overthrow sultans if they felt like it. That's not hyperbole. They literally deposed more than one poor guy who wasn't living up to their standards, by which we mean not giving them enough bonuses or meat stew. The janissary version of a Yelp review was just murder. Still, there was structure to the chaos. Janissary patrols kept tabs on fires, which were the medieval city's worst nightmare. With wooden houses, oil lamps, and windy hills, a spark could turn into a catastrophe in minutes. So if you were lucky or unlucky, you might get the fire watch shift. That meant scanning rooftops, sniffing the breeze for smoke, and occasionally sprinting with buckets through narrow alleys. Not exactly a sleepy job. When you did get a rest, though, it was shoulder to shoulder with your comrades. You shared blankets. Literally. The idea was warmth, frugality, and team bonding, though realistically, it probably led to a lot of grumpy snoring competitions. Some officers had private rooms, but the rank and file, they made do with body heat and grumbled lullabies. One quirky habit recorded in traveler diaries was a janissary's love for storytelling. After the night patrol, before the second sleep truly kicked in, there'd often be tales. War stories, ghost stories, moral parables involving surprisingly clever foxes. Some say the art of the meta, the Ottoman storyteller, got passed around informally in those barracks. So maybe you, tired and half-conscious, would lie back, eyes closed, listening to the guy across from you spin a tale about a lion who fell in love with a melon. Don't ask. You're too sleepy to question it anyway. There's even some evidence of janissaries keeping journals, scraps of thoughts, dates of battles, complaints about rice rations. One particularly fussy entry from the 1700s grumbles about a recruit who kept sneaking in his cat. Apparently, it shed too much. Priorities. But here's a detail that really gets overlooked. Despite their elite status, janissaries weren't highborn. Most came from modest roots, and despite all the glamour on paper, their lives were deeply regimented. Early rising, daily drills, endless obedience, especially before the Corps got, well, bloated with power. That sense of duty bled into their sleep. They didn't dream of freedom. They dreamt of marching orders, of new boots, of soup served hot and on time. Still, there were quieter moments. Second sleep could be peaceful. A candle flickers lower. You roll onto your side. You dream not of battle, but fig trees and the sea. Even a janissary deserves that, at least once in a while. And as the sky begins to pale again over the domes and rooftops of Istanbul, the second sleep fades like mist. Morning is here. You stretch your limbs, tuck your blanket under the cot, and brace for a world already stirring outside those heavy wooden doors. You rub the sleep from your eyes, well, metaphorically, and shift from the barracks of the janissaries to the winding alleyways of a much more delicate part of Ottoman life, the household. While military discipline shaped one kind of Ottoman night, the domestic world of families, kitchens, and courtyards had its own slow, sleepy pulse, especially when it came to the empire's favorite pastime after dark, talking, eating, and, you guessed it, more talking. See, the household wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a hub, a fortress of cushions and shadows, full of murmurs and soft lamps and clinking teacups. You got your extended family members, uncles with loud opinions, aunts who know everyone's secrets, and cousins who mysteriously always have extra pistachios. And they're all drifting in and out of these tiny courtyards long after sunset. Dinner's long over. The chores are done. This is the hour for stories and sleepy laughter. Mainstream historical fact. The average Ottoman household, especially in urban areas like Bursa or Aleppo, revolved around a shared courtyard space. It served as kitchen, laundry zone, children's playground, gossip arena, and sometimes a makeshift bird sanctuary. Because yes, Ottoman families love birds, parakeets in particular. Apparently, if your parakeet could recite a prayer, you were basically winning at life. Now, here's the more curious bit. Ottoman families didn't necessarily go to bed all at once. First sleep and second sleep were often staggered, especially in larger households. Grandma might nod off after prayers, while your older cousin stayed up plucking at her saz, softly humming a love song that the neighbors pretended not to hear. And the kids? They fell asleep whenever the grown-ups ran out of figs to bribe them with. There's something profoundly peaceful about it. How everyone eased into sleep at their own pace, with no rigid bedtime rules except don't knock over the oil lamp again. And between those two stretches of slumber, in that middle-of-the-night stillness, someone was always awake. Usually someone with something to say. You can almost hear it now. The low murmur of a father and son whispering about tomorrow's spice delivery. The soft creak of a grandmother's prayer beads. The unmistakable sound of someone trying and failing to quietly sneak the last bite of syrupy baklava without waking the whole household. Historians still argue whether this rhythm, this fluid, multi-layered pattern of nightly life, was a response to climate, religion, or simply habit. Was it shaped by the long summer evenings, the call to prayer before dawn, the lack of Netflix? The jury's still out. But we do know this. Ottoman nights were porous. They breathed in and out. People moved from sleep to waking without guilt or rush. Second sleep wasn't a problem. It was expected. In fact, some physicians recommended it, advising short periods of wakefulness for digestion and relaxation before returning to bed. A healthy night was a layered one. You're not just lying on a mattress here. You're on a woven mat with 2 or 3 thick quilts. There's a bolster under your knees. Maybe a curtain hanging loosely to give you a little privacy, or to keep the cat from nesting on your feet. Someone in the house is still awake. Maybe a teenage nephew trying to read by the flickering light of a dying lamp. Maybe your sister-in-law softly pacing and humming lullabies to a fussy baby. This isn't the kind of silence you get from isolation. It's the kind that hums gently with presence. And speaking of lullabies, some of the most beautiful Ottoman folk songs were basically just long, elaborate ways to convince small humans to please, for the love of all that is holy, go to sleep. They featured everything from birds that deliver dreams to stars that whisper secrets into your pillow. Some had verses that went on for 20 minutes, not because the kids needed them, but because the adults just really enjoyed the poetry. Let's zoom in on something especially charming. The habit of nighttime storytelling. Unlike the public metas, who shouted tales in bazaars during daylight hours, this was the intimate kind. Whispered stories told just before second sleep. Mothers passed them down. So did grandfathers with dramatically arched eyebrows. Tales of clever thieves, talking camels, and magical sleep-inducing gardens. And if your uncle was feeling particularly bold, he might tell a love story that ended with a single tragic tear and an awkward silence. One particularly odd detail: some households believed in leaving a tiny bowl of water near the bed at night to trap wandering spirits. Whether it worked or not is up for debate, but it's a pretty poetic excuse for hydrating in the dark without stubbing your toe. Another small tradition: airing the bedding. Ottoman women often took immense pride in the ritual of setting out bedding each night and folding it back each morning, stacking it neatly against the walls. Sleeping was, in many homes, a temporary act. You slept where you lived. So each night, a living room became a bedroom, and each morning, the bedroom vanished. And perhaps that's what makes these night rhythms so interesting. They were flexible, multifunctional. A space could be sacred and ordinary all at once. A soft mattress on the floor might cradle your grandmother at midnight, then host a backgammon tournament 12 hours later. So as second sleep draws near and you roll onto your other side, the whispers around you fade. The courtyard is gone still. Even the parakeet has tucked its head under one wing. A candle sputters out somewhere down the hall. The wind rattles the carved lattice on the window. You sigh, warm, full, and oddly at peace. And tomorrow, the same cycle will begin again. Wakefulness folded into rest. Rest folded into family. And sleep, that gentle anchor always there, pulling the empire softly toward the dawn. The candlelight flickers, then fades completely, and now the scene shifts again. You stretch into the city itself, as if floating gently above the rooftops of Istanbul. Well, Constantinople, as it once was, though by the time we're meandering through Ottoman alleys, the name has fully transitioned. You're drifting past pointed domes and narrow cobbled streets, where even the buildings seem half asleep. You pass over the stalls of spice vendors shuttered for night, their goods blanketed against the morning dew. You hover above hammams that hum with the fading heat of the day's final bathers. And just ahead, glinting softly under the moonlight, is the silhouette of something that doesn't sleep at all, the mosque. Because as dreamy as Ottoman households were, nothing shaped the sleep rhythms of the empire quite like the call to prayer. Yes, you guessed it. This section we're curling into is about the sacred architecture that quietly kept time long before alarm clocks and phone notifications were a thing. Mainstream historical fact. In the Ottoman Empire, 5 daily prayers, salat, dictated the pulse of daily life and nightlife. These included Far dawn, Dur noon, ASR afternoon, Maghrib sunset, and Isha night. You can just squeeze them in when convenient. The sound of the muezzin, calling out from the mosque's minaret, marked time itself. But let's focus on the night. After the Isha prayer, when the city dimmed and people slowly withdrew into their homes or hammams, the world began to exhale. It was a spiritual time. Quiet, reflective. There were extra nighttime prayers too, tahajjud, for those especially pious or insomniac. This was a voluntary prayer performed in the deepest part of the night, often between the first and second sleeps. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal prayer habits were common across all social classes or mainly practiced among the scholarly and devout. Some say it was widespread and woven into community habits. Others argue that it remained the pursuit of spiritual specialists like Sufis or madrasa students, rather than something your average spice merchant got up for in the middle of winter. But either way, those dark hours held sacred space. Imagine it. A world lit only by oil lamps and stars, and yet within it, a structure rises with open doors. Inside, a handful of figures kneel silently on worn prayer rugs. You can hear the murmur of recitations, the shuffle of soft steps across cool stone. There's no hurry, no traffic jam, just time and silence and something deeply rooted in the rhythm of being. You glance up at the minaret again. In some cities, the muezzins would sing the call to prayer from within the slender spire, climbing hundreds of steps to belt out the sacred lines above the rooftops. Later, small wooden platforms were built halfway up, making it slightly less likely they'd pull a hamstring. And in the grandest mosques, multiple muezzins would answer one another from separate minarets like sleepy sonic lighthouses. Now, let's not pretend every single person bounded out of bed joyfully at 3:47 a.m. Some did. Others, not so much. There were night owls even then. People who groaned, rolled over, and muttered something into their pillow about getting to it later. But there's evidence that even when people didn't rise, they still heard the call and felt its rhythm embedded in the night. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some imams were known for their uniquely beautiful, if dramatic, calls, like full theatrical renditions. One famous muezzin in Damascus was so beloved for his velvet voice that people in neighboring streets set alarms just to wake up and hear him, not even to pray. Yes, the first historical example of a sleep-depriving influencer. And while we're on sonic oddities, did you know that in some Ottoman towns, drummers were paid to wake people up for the pre-dawn meal during Ramadan? These guys were like spiritual roosters, pounding their drums through winding alleys, reciting rhyme verses, and sometimes throwing compliments for the local governor just in case someone powerful was listening. If your sleep was interrupted, well, it was for a good cause. And besides, who could stay mad at a guy in a fez shouting poetry at 4 a.m.? As the night crept along and the moon shifted overhead, mosques didn't close their doors. They remained open like lighthouses. Some travelers even curled up near the columns, using their cloaks as makeshift pillows. These weren't always grand structures. In tiny villages, the local masjid might be a single-room building with a creaky door and a squeaky wood floor, but the feeling, the stillness, just as thick, just as deep, In larger cities like Edirne or Cairo, the big imperial mosques often doubled as community centers. You might hear a sermon echoing off marble in the middle of the night, or the low drone of Sufi zikr, those rhythmic chants that blended repetition with breath. It wasn't uncommon for neighbors to gather in silence, simply existing near each other, half asleep, fully peaceful. By now, second sleep is near. The Isha prayer has long passed. The final candles have sputtered out in households all over the city. But from above, if you listen carefully, you can still make out the sound of a sleepy janissary snoring on his rooftop, a child turning over in her bed of quilts, and somewhere, faint and distant, the last echo of a call to prayer that slips gently into your dreams. You shift softly now, slipping out of prayer-stilled night and into the domestic hush of another Ottoman home, modest, creaky, and welcoming in a way that only a place with too many slippers by the door can be. Here, we're going deeper into something that shaped Ottoman nights almost as much as sleep itself, the intricate etiquette of rest. That's right, bedtime in this empire wasn't just about when or where. It was how. You're in a shadowy corner of a family home in Bursa, somewhere around the 17th century, and you realize bedtime isn't a solo activity. Not entirely. Sure, everyone has their own woven matter mattress, but these get rolled out only after a subtle but decisive cue. Yawns, oil lamps dim to a polite flicker, and someone saying, "Shall we prepare the beds?" Now here's a mainstream historical fact to stretch out under. Ottomans didn't leave their beds out during the day. Instead, bedding. Mattresses called dosek and comforters called igan was stored in closets called yukluk, often behind carved wooden doors that creaked slightly with the weight of sleep waiting inside. When the time came, someone, usually the lady of the house or her eldest daughter, will begin unstacking these sleepy parcels, arranging them methodically across the floor. If you've ever wrestled a fitted sheet at 2 a.m., consider this a simpler age. No mattress tags, no hospital corners, just thick cotton stuff rolls unfurled across rugs that had already lived 3 generations. Each person had a favorite spot. Some preferred the corner, less drafty. Others staked out territory near the hearth or window. Placement wasn't random, though. Sleeping order followed an invisible thread of family hierarchy, social respect, and personal habit. Historians still argue whether men and women routinely shared sleeping quarters or preferred their own spaces. Some accounts say mixed sleeping was common in nuclear families. Others suggest that in larger homes, the sexes divided into separate wings come bedtime. It likely varied by class and region, with Anatolian villagers doing things one way, and Istanbul's palace elite doing something completely different. Because of course they did. Speaking of elite, here's a quirky, fringy bedtime detail to fluff under your metaphorical pillow. In wealthier households, sleep came with sleeping sherbets. That's right, a lightly sweet, often floral drink made from cherry, rose, or tamarind syrup was sometimes offered before bed. Imagine dozing off with the lingering taste of rose water on your tongue, all because your host insisted on good sleep hygiene centuries before lavender pillow sprays became a thing. You might also find scented cloths, bits of linen dabbed in rose oil or musk, placed beneath pillows or tucked into collars. Sleep wasn't just about restoration. It was about refinement. And if that doesn't sound relaxing enough, consider that some homes kept a tiny brazier burning low through the night, releasing slow tendrils of cedar or frankincense. Nothing like falling asleep inside what basically amounts to a pre-electric aromatherapy boutique. But Ottoman bedtime was entirely serene. Enter the Ottoman mosquito, a tireless, bloodthirsty diva that cared not for sleep rituals or scented linens. To combat them, homes used gauzy bed nets, tulle perdler, draped from ceiling hooks. These weren't just practical. They were sometimes embroidered or trimmed, proving once again that the Ottomans could make anything look stylish, even bug armor. And what about nighttime noises? In a household with multiple generations, plus possibly a servant or two, silence was more art than expectation. Children snored, grandfathers muttered, dogs barked somewhere outside, and sometimes the odd night owl neighbor wandered to the courtyard mumbling something about a misplaced key. You didn't demand silence. You worked with it. In urban homes, the occasional call of a street vendor still floated in at odd hours. Yes, some street hawkers even made rounds at night. A man selling hot milk, calling gently through the alleys. Someone else advertising late-night pastries. Because why should dreams be the only place for desserts? The pace was slow, meditative. Even the act of climbing into bed, rolling down onto your mat, wrapping the yagana around your legs, positioning your embroidered pillow, just so, was a kind of personal ceremony. People slept on their right sides when possible, in accordance with religious custom, and avoided excessive conversation once the lamps were out. There were superstitions, too. Whispering too much at night was thought to attract spirits or unsettled dreams. And definitely don't sleep on your stomach. That was frowned upon for reasons ranging from medical to mystical. Now, let's gently crack open the world of dreams. In Ottoman culture, dreams weren't just your brain's midnight cinema. They held weight, meaning, purpose. Many people kept dream journals. Yes, actual parchment diaries full of slumber stories. Some even visited dream interpreters, the way we might see a therapist or tarot reader. You describe your night vision, and the interpreter would pore over ancient texts, mutter contemplative phrases, and then pronounce that your dream about fish jumping through doorways definitely meant your cousin would get married soon. Ottoman society took dreams seriously enough that sultans sometimes acted upon them. One tale tells of a vizier's dream predicting unrest. He reported it, and the Sultan promptly altered court appointments. Dream reports became part of political gossip, household conversation, even religious teaching. But for the average sleeper, let's say you drift off under your yagan, still hearing the quiet murmur of your brother, trying not to sneeze too loudly, and feel the weight of that sherbet-tinged calm. The stars, visible through a high-up window or a tiny crack in a roof shutter, glimmer just faintly. And as your first sleep descends, you wonder vaguely whether that milk vendor might swing back in the morning, just in time for your second wake-up. You wake, or maybe you don't, but your mind slowly drifts into the realm of the Ottoman second sleep, a fascinating practice that turns our modern idea of a solid 8-hour snooze on its head. This is where things get truly interesting, or rather, soporifically peculiar. You see, the Ottoman sleep cycle wasn't just one long block, but often split into two distinct phases, separated by a period of quiet wakefulness. Imagine your night divided by a gentle pause, like a soft commercial break during a particularly long nap. After the first deep sleep, people would naturally rouse sometime after midnight. No alarms here, just the body's own rhythm nudging you awake. You'd lie there for a bit, maybe chat softly with a partner or a sibling, enjoy a small snack, or even get up for a quick prayer. This quiet time might last anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, a peaceful interlude when the world outside was as hushed as a library after closing time. Mainstream historians note that this segmented sleep pattern wasn't unique to the Ottoman Empire. It was common across Europe and the Middle East before the Industrial Era, and artificial lighting transformed our nights into one long stretch of unconsciousness. But in Ottoman culture, it had its own special flavor, often framed by religious or social rituals that made the pause feel intentional rather than inconvenient. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman households kept night attendants, servants who stayed awake during this quiet phase. Their job was surprisingly important. They'd make sure everyone was safe, bring fresh water, prepare late-night snacks, or even quietly move around the house to fend off pesky rodents or insects disturbing the peace. You might think having a night watchman for your naps is overkill, but in a sprawling household filled with priceless rugs, intricate pottery, and sleeping children, a little extra vigilance went a long way. Historians still debate whether this biphasic sleep was more common in urban or rural areas, or how it might have shifted depending on season and latitude. Did people in Istanbul follow the same pattern as those in a tiny Anatolian village? Did daylight length affect the timing? The evidence is tantalizing but patchy, leaving room for lively discussion around the academic campfire. During that quiet wakefulness, people might engage in contemplative activities. Some read poetry by candlelight, others meditated or recited religious texts, often verses from the Quran or Sufi poetry. This wasn't just a gap in your sleep, but a cherished, reflective pause. So, the second sleep wasn't a failure of slumber, but a meaningful part of the night's rhythm, an intermission in the grand play of rest. In wealthier homes, this time was sometimes used for intimate conversation. Imagine sitting with a loved one, hushed voices mingling with the faint scent of rosewater or cedar smoke. There was room for storytelling or planning the next day, or just enjoying the rare silence of a world paused. This night's second act offered connection and calm in equal measure. You might wonder about the impact of this split sleep on daily life. Well, Ottoman calendars and diaries suggest that people often schedule their days around this rhythm. Market openings, prayer times, and social visits all dance in tandem with the ebb and flow of segmented sleep. Rather than dragging through the day, many found this pattern refreshing, like a natural espresso shot for the spirit. But don't imagine everyone welcomed the second sleep with open arms. Some medical writers of the time warned about the dangers of waking too long or too often. They cautioned that excessive wakefulness might lead to overthinking, or worse, invite nightmares and restless spirits. These fears were not merely superstition. They were woven into broader Ottoman understanding of balance between body and soul. And speaking of dreams, that quiet time between sleeps was often when people believed spirits or jinn might visit, or when the veil between worlds thinned just a bit. It was a liminal time where reality blurred and the mind floated in twilight. As you lie in your woven mat, tucked beneath the yagan once again, you might just catch a glimpse of those shadowy visitors, or at least imagine them. Sleep scientists today are fascinated by biphasic sleep patterns, noting that modern split sleepers might be unknowingly tapping into a deeply human, ancient rhythm. So the Ottomans, with their split nights, may have been onto something. Historians still argue whether industrialization alone ended this tradition, or if cultural shifts and religious practices played equal roles. As your eyelids grow heavier again, you feel yourself folding into the second phase of sleep, that deep, restorative downpour of unconsciousness. The house settles, the brazier smolders, and the city outside remains cloaked in quiet mystery. It's a gentle reminder that sleep is not just about closing your eyes, but about entering a rhythm older than any calendar or clock.